Good morning, everyone. First of all, let me tell you where I was born. I was born in Sudetenland, which is part of Czechoslovakia. A little bit of a preface about Sudetenland. Sudetenland had primarily German-speaking citizens when Czechoslovakia was formed after World War I. And by the time I was born in 1934, there were 3.5 million German-speaking Czechs living in Sudetenland. And Sudetenland was near Germany. And the Sudeten Germans, they were most sympathetic what was going on in Germany. So let me preface it first. When I was born on July 23. About 10 days later is when Adolf Hitler was appointed as leader of Germany. And Adolf Hitler was a notorious anti-Semite. In fact, he was very much supportive of burning down of synagogues. He was also supportive of bonfires being staged where they would, citizens would throw any books that were written by Jews into the bonfire. And all this was being drifted over to what was going on in Sudetenland, because the 3.5 million citizens, many of them became part of a Sudeten Nazi party in Sudetenland. So it was very awkward for us, being that we were Jews. But my dad had a good job, and I think primarily when my parents drifted to Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia, other parts of Czechoslovakia, they did because he got this very nice job as a representative and traveling salesman for a clothing manufacturer. Anyway, Hitler was pressuring that Sudetenland become part of Germany. And in fact, in 1938, in the spring, he managed to get Austria to become part of Germany. And he then approached the Prime Minister of England. His name was Chamberlain. Can you show the picture of Chamberlain? Oh, here it is. This is Chamberlain. And Chamberlain was thrilled that Hitler wanted Sudetenland to become part of Germany. And he supported it, and sure enough, September is when Sudetenland became part of Germany. And my parents panicked when they learned this, because the Germans were going to invade Sudetenland. And my parents, they abandoned their paid-up house. My dad was not able to get any money out of the savings from the bank, because the bank was closed officially until Nazi Germany occupied Sudetenland. And we, three of us, we escaped to Prague, Czechoslovakia, which was the capital of Czechoslovakia. So I was 4 years old. And we were there, and my parents had very little money. And in fact, my mom did manage to bring some of her jewelry with her, and she sold it, and the money she got from that is what we were living on. So there we were, and then in 1939, when I was nearly 5 years old, the Nazi Germany formally occupied Prague. And my parents got panic-stricken for me, because some of the children, Jewish children, were taken off the street by the Nazi Germans. And my parents were really worried about me. And they did locate an organization that arranged for Jewish children to be moved with a Gentile family. And I did not know this, but my parents did arrange, they got the information from the organization that they were going to move me to a family living in, a Gentile family living in Switzerland, and that I would live there. But I was not aware of this, and I was at that time 4.5 years old already. And so I went to the office with my parents. I didn't know what it was about. And that is when my parents were informed by the head of the organization that I was going to be moved to Switzerland. And that is when I learned. And apparently, my mother told me later, I started screaming and crying and begging my parents to change their mind that I don't want to be separated from them. Please keep me with you. Please keep me with you. And they did. They got overwhelmed by my reaction. And they told the head of the organization, we're leaving, we changed our minds. So we did. We left and we went back to the place where we were renting in Prague. And it turned out that where my parents were born, the two places where they were born, at one point it was part of Czechoslovakia, and at one point it wasn't. But at that time, this was in 1939, at that time Hungary, as a reward for becoming an ally of Germany, they received part of the territory to become part of Hungary, and my parents learned where they were born became part of Hungary. So they figured this would be a very good thing for us to move to Budapest, escape from the Nazi Germans living in, being occupied in Prague. So we went to Budapest. We took a train, we went to Budapest, and my parents got jobs. No, that's not it. I'll talk about it in a minute. So my parents, they did get a job. My dad got a job as a delivery man for a Jewish bakery. And my mom worked as a part-time as a waitress for a nearby primitive restaurant. And so there we were in, this was in 1939, early 1940. And we were living there, and my parents were struggling, and I was okay. And, but we sensed there was quite a bit of anti-Semitism in Hungary. And then in 1941, when I was already 6.5 years old, my parents, particularly my mother, was worried about me not being able to go to a Hungarian school because I could not speak Hungarian. And they spoke some Hungarian. So what they both figured, is maybe I should get to some kind of a summer camp and be a few months with in that summer camp, and I would interact with these Hungarian-speaking vacationers, these kids, and I would learn some Hungarian enough that by September of 1941, I could go to a school and they would accept me because I spoke a little bit of Hungarian by then. And sure enough, I was enrolled into the summer camp, which was about 100 kilometers from Budapest, at the Danube. And I was there, and I was quite thrilled to be with the other kids. And I started learning some of the Hungarian, and in the meantime we went sailing in the lake, and I learned how to kick a soccer ball, and I really enjoyed myself. But after a few weeks that we were there, 2 Hungarian policemen showed up. They called themselves gendarmes, the French word for police. And they showed up and they went to the director's office. and they demanded to see the names and birthplaces of all the vacationers at that summer camp. And we all had to line up. We were about a couple of hundred kids. We were lined up in front of the director's office. And then the policeman came out. By the way, they both had bayoneted rifles with them. And one of them took a list and he started naming. He said, the names that I'm giving you, turn to the left of the office, stay at the left of the office. And there's a reason, I'll tell you why. He said that. So he started listing names. He listed 33 kids. That's 32 others and me. Had to go to the left side of the office. And we were then informed that we were going to go to another summer camp. Could you put the map on, Stacy? And we were put on the train, and from Danube, we stopped first in Budapest, and I got really anxious. I wasn't the only one, the other kids too. I got really anxious to go to another summer camp. Why would I have to go? Where was it? And in fact, if you look at the arrow at the map, it was in another country, Slovakia. So I was there a little upset, and I got to the car's window, and I was looking out, and there were quite a few grown-ups hanging out around there. And in the distance, I saw my parents. Apparently, they must have learned that we were being transferred to another place. So I started screaming for them, and they rushed over to the side of the car. And I begged them, I said, please take me off this. I don't want to go anywhere. I want to be back with you. And my dad stood by the train car, by the train window, and then my mother said, I'll go to the policeman who's guarding you out there, and I'll talk to him and see if I can get you off the train. And I saw my mom going to the left of the car, and I did see her talking to this policeman with a bayoneted rifle. And then I remember him, and today, I am 87 years old, I remember it today like it was yesterday. I saw him just gesturing his bayoneted rifle for my mom to move away. And she started rushing back to where I was with my dad outside. And the train car started moving at that time. We started moving to that place in Slovakia. And my dad, in fact, was rushing along the car train and managed to get some coins in his pocket and hand it over to me. And by then, my mother had caught up with my dad. And she yelled up to me that I'm going to come and get you where they are taking you. And sure enough, overnight we were taken to Garoň, which was a place in Slovakia, and it was not a vacation place, of course. What it was an internment camp, and it was fenced in. And on the front side, to the right from where we were going to be staying, there was a machine gun manned by one of the policemen to guard us. We were prisoners. We were not vacationers anymore. And on a daily basis, I managed to go to the fenced part where we were staying. And I was looking for my mom to come and get me. And I was already nearly 7 years old. And I waited and waited. And it went on for months. And eventually, as I was watching, I saw a black car pull up on the front side of our internment camp. And out came of the car in a white dress, my mom. And she was holding documents in her hand. And one of the policemen rushed over to where she was, and I saw her being rifle-butted into the stomach by him. She collapsed on the ground. And I remember clearly yelling. And then the man who drove her came out of the car and rushed over to the policeman and showed a government badge. And sure enough, one of his companions, another policeman, came over to where I was and says, "Come on, come with me." And I followed him and went out of the internment camp and rejoined my mother. And I remember she managed to stand up after she was stomach-butted, and she kissed me and says, come on, let's go home." And I got into the car, and that man drove us back to Budapest, 300 miles, by the way. Drove us back to Budapest, and I got reunited with my dad. And I want to preface a little bit, how did my mother rescue me? My mother, when she learned that I was taken to Slovakia, she went to a priest that my mother learned was quite sympathetic to the Jews, but the suffering of the Jews. And she went to the priest, and she said, she decided to lie to him in a way, but he didn't care about that. But she said, "Listen, I'm Christian, and my son, who's half Christian, because I made a mistake of marrying a Jew, and he was taken away with other Jewish children to an internment camp. And he gave her a baptismal certificate that he had signed and said, fill in your son's name and take it to the Department of Interior and complain to them what happened." And later on, my mother told me he was sympathetic and he knew exactly what was going on and the fact she was lying about the fact that she was a Christian. And my mom went to the internment, to the Department of Interior and complained to them about the disadvantage and that I was taken away. And that is how that man agreed, the man from the government agreed to drive her to the Slovakia to get me. So anyway, this was 1942, and I was reunited with my parents, and I remember because I was very hungry from the internment camp, I remember my dad had brought a little piece of bread and the rolls, and I put it on the table, had it on the table. And I remember taking a piece of roll and biting into it, taking a piece of bread, biting into it, going back and forth. And they got a kick out of it. But I was so thrilled to be reunited with my parents. So this was 1942. And 1942, by the way, had a lot of bombings already in Budapest, a lot of carpet bombings. Carpet bombing is when airplanes are, a lot of airplanes are flying together and they're bombing wherever they fly. And I learned that my dad, on a Friday, he went to the synagogue where he usually went on Friday night. And he never came back from the synagogue. And by that point I was sleeping, and my mom woke me up and said, "You gotta go and find my dad." And we did. We went out to the synagogue. The synagogue was already closed, and my mother took me to the local police department and complained the fact that my dad disappeared. And the policeman made a call, and then hung up and said he found out that my dad and all the other Jewish men who were in the synagogue were taken out, and they were taken to the forced labor camp that the Hungarians had. And my dad was taken also, and he was there. And I just want to tell you a little bit what happened to him. The Hungarians were worried about their bombings, and what they wanted is for these Jewish men to be trained as firemen to put out the fires. So they lined up my dad and a bunch of other men by a Hungarian soldier, and he told them that they were standing by a building, and the building had a ladder leaning against the building, and next to it was a fire truck, and the soldier told the Jewish men that when it is their turn to climb up that ladder, which they have to do, is to take the fire hose, put it on the shoulder, and walk up that ladder, and then deposit the fire hose on the window of that building. And my dad was the first one on the line, and it was a little chilly, and he walked over to the Hungarian soldier and said, "Can I go to the truck to get my jacket? I have a heavy jacket, and I'll come right back." And the soldier said, "Yeah, go ahead." And so my dad was going to the truck, and while he was going, the man behind him was ordered to go climb up the ladder, and the guy took the fire hose and he started climbing up the ladder, and sure enough, the ladder broke, and he fell down to his death. And my dad realized that by that point he got to the truck. He never bothered to get his jacket. He just hid in the back of the truck. And sure enough, not too long later, the dead man was deposited on the back of the truck, I guess, and they were going to be taken someplace else to get rid of the body. And my dad was in the truck that was taken away, and then he managed to sneak out through the back of the truck when it stopped at one point, and escape and come back to my mom and me. That's how we got reunited again. And this was 1942. In 1943, again, we had a lot of difficulties. And by this point, there was a Jewish lady in the place where we were living that noticed me, and she went down to my mom and said that she wants to arrange for me to eat with different families. And so I did. She arranged for 7 different families for me to eat with lunch. And my mom did manage to get to a poorhouse and get some money from it, get some food rather. And so it was. So it was in 1943, and we had difficulties. And by the way, my dad was taken back and forth to the forced labor camp. He had difficulty, but he he managed to get away from the labor camp and come back to us. I remember at one bombing, he managed to come back to us, and we had to be in the cellar during the bombings, and he came back to us, and I remember when there were bombings nearby. During one of the explosions, my dad lunged forward to cover my mom and me with his body. And so we were, this was 1943, and then came 1944, the Nazi Germany formally occupied Budapest, and Jews were ordered to go outside, could only go outside from where they were living for 3 hours a day. And they had to wear, I'm wearing this, can you see it? They had to wear a flag, a Jewish, one of these things, the Hungarian thing. And I had to do it for 3 hours, but I had one problem my mother was worried about. It's because there was a law, the Germans instituted, that if any Jew that went outside and just covered his or her Star of David with his left hand, they would get arrested. And my mother learned that there was a woman, a Jewish woman, who walked out down the street and stopped in front of a store window to arrange her hair. And sure enough, she got arrested for covering the Star of David. She got arrested by one of the local police and taken away to a camp. So it was really a problem, and my mother was worried about me because I was somewhat left-handed, and she was worried about me going outside or by myself. She insisted that when I go outside, whether I'm with her or not, to keep my left hand in my pocket in case I have to scratch my nose. That I don't do it with my left hand, but I do it with my right hand. And so it was, and we had a lot of difficulties. And at one point, there was another big carpet bombing in Budapest by the Allies. And they were, the Hungarians were really upset because what they claimed, listen to this, what they claimed is that the Hungarian Jews, whenever there was bombings, they communicated with the pilots where to drop the bombs where Hungarian Gentiles were living. And at that point, this was also in 1944, at that point, we were all thrown out of where we were living, the rental places. And Jews were forced to start moving in together in one apartment where they would have 5, 6, 7 families. And we ended up in one of those apartments with other Jews. And we were sleeping on the floor, and it was just awkward. This was in 44. And at one point, my mom learned, could you move it to Raoul Wallenberg? My mom learned that, hold on to this, the Schutzpass. My mom learned that Raoul Wallenberg, who was a Swedish diplomat, he started buying up some houses for Jews to live in. And on each house, he would put a Swedish flag. The Swedes were not involved in the World War II. A Swedish flag in front of it, ostensibly, that will protect Jews from being occupied by the Nazis who were running around. And my mom did get this Schutzpass from this diplomat and moved to the next station. Let me see the map of Budapest. Here, and we moved to this house near the Danube River, and that's where we were living for a while. So this was in 1944, and then came November of 1944. When we were living there, we started hearing explosions coming from near Budapest, because the Russians were about to occupy Budapest. And my parents thought that it would be a good thing for us to just escape the building and try to make it back to the front line where this attacking was going on. And so we escaped on a Sunday, the three of us, and there were quite a few others, families there running or nearing where the sounds of explosions were. And just at one point, several Hungarian police stopped us, and they lined us up, and I remember standing against this brick wall where we were lined up, holding my mom's hand and my dad's hand, and I had a feeling at that point that we were going to die. And as I was holding their hands, all of a sudden there were two Hungarian Nazis who had all wore, they wore these black uniforms. These Hungarian Nazis came over and they yelled at the police, "How dare you trying to kill the Jews, but it's our job to do that, not yours." And these police, they just escaped. And at that point, something happened. Just one of the miracles is that these two Hungarian Nazis turned out to be Jews who were disguised, running around trying to find Jews in trouble. They're the ones who got us back to this place where we were living. And we got back, and a few days later, the Nazis invaded our building, and they herded us out of the apartments, and they separated the men and the women and children. And I do remember my mom had brought a piece of bread with her as we were herded outside our building. And she broke a piece of bread and she gave it to me and she says, "Go to where Dad is and give him the bread and come right back." And I remember doing that. I took the bread and I went along where the women and children were standing, and there was a little opening there, and I sneaked over, and I got over to where my dad was standing, and I gave him the bread, and I remember him tapping my head, and I went right back to Mom. And as it turned out, my dad was taken away along with the other men from where he was standing, and they marched them, the Hungarian Nazis marched them to Austria, to the Austrian border. And as it turned out, later on we learned that my dad was taken to one of the trains, and he was taken to concentration camp, the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in Germany. And I came back, I was there with my mom, and we went back upstairs, and I was saddened that And so was my mom, that we lost my dad. And so it was, and we were standing there. And the day after my dad was taken away, the Hungarian Nazis came back to our building and herded us out again. And my mom got worried about it, and she held onto my hand as we were marching down. We were on the 4th floor, by the way, of the building. So we marched down the 4 floors, and then when we got downstairs, the opening, the front door opening was to the left, and one of those Nazis has just herded out one of the last neighbors on the left. But on the right was a two-wheel cart leaning against the glass door, and my mom edged over to the right with me. And when we got to the cart, still holding onto my hand, she stumbled over on the cart, and the cart broke the glass door, and my mom landed there, still holding onto my hand. And I screamed to the guy in the front, even though I didn't know this. I screamed to the front, "My mom has just died." But the guy just shrugged his shoulder because his leader was hurting, saying, "Come on," and he went out. At that point, my mom just opened her eyes, and I hugged her, and we went back upstairs. As it turned out, by the way, I don't know if you can see it this way, the Jews, all the Jews that were from our building and other buildings, they were herded here along the Danube, and many of them were shot dead. And if any of you go to Budapest, and if you go to this part of the Danube, you can see a whole hundreds of yards of shoes, that may have belonged to these Jewish people and who were killed along the Danube. So we were upstairs, and there we were, and we were somewhat anxious because we felt that the Russians are going to occupy Budapest, and they did. They came. Then there were two tanks that came in front of our building, and along one side, our living room faced the Danube, and on the right side faced one of the side streets. And on the side street, I could see from our window that there were maybe 10 Nazi Germans. They were digging up the street, the cobblestones, I guess so that the tanks would not go in there. And I do remember doing something and my mother didn't mind it. I took one of the chairs and I threw it out the window, ostensibly so that it would hit the Nazi Germans down below. Anyway, what happened is that on the front line, I saw these two tanks, and Russians came out. They went to the side, and they were shooting back and forth with the Nazi Germans. And by noon or so, the Russians successfully killed all the Nazi Germans who were digging up the cobblestones. And right after that, we knew we were liberated, and we went downstairs, and to greet these Russians, and we did, and there was one of them. That came up to me. He was very young, and he told me that I gave my name, and he gave his name, and he he pointed to his tank and pointed up, indicating that I should climb up the tank. And I did. I climbed up the tank, and on top of the tank, I clambered forward to where the cannon was. And I straddled the cannon, and I started yelling, boom, boom, boom. And my mother almost collapsed with laughter. She thought it was fun. And then I came right down, and my mom and I went back upstairs. And that was the end, and then we were liberated. And I'll tell you one little story about that, and then I rush forward, is that when we went upstairs, my mother spoke some Russian, by the way, because she learned in school. She gave me a pot, and she said, I noticed on the far end, there were some other Russian soldiers that were cooking from a spent cannon shell. It looks like they were making soup. So go with the pot over, because we're liberated, and say to them the following: Daimo malo soup means give me some soup. And then say, Mami kachora, my mother is sick. And they'll give you soup. So I went back downstairs, I did exactly that. I went there, and then one of the Russian soldiers said to me, pointed to another one, that he'll give me some soup. The other guy took me into the doorway, he took my pot, and he urinated into my pot. And I, scared, I ran back home and told Mom that I didn't get any soup. So we have other difficulties with the Russians at that point. So this was 1945, when we were liberated. And this was in early 1945. And we were there for a while, and then my parents, my mother, she was somewhat concerned about the safety of being in that building. And because the Russians were sneaking into it and stuff. And she learned that there was a Zionist organization that was operating for Jews. And my mom learned that there were actually two, Hashomer HaZair for the grown-ups, and there was also for the children, there was a Nazi organization. And she arranged for both of us to be staying with the Zionist organizations in the other part of Budapest. And then one day, come July 23, 1945, when I turned 11 years old, I got my greatest birthday present ever. The kids I was with, they celebrated my birthday. We always celebrated my birthday. And then when we came back, the director of our camp, he came over to me. He held my head in his hand, and he said, "Your dad has returned, and he's with your mom." He learned it. And I thanked him, and I hugged him, and I ran off, and I ran halfway across Budapest and went up the building. And sure enough, my dad was there with my mom. And I remember sitting on his lap and kissing him, and I was ever grateful that he was back. So there he was. How am I doing in time, Stacy? My parents and I, we eventually escaped Budapest with the other Zionists in a cattle car, and we had a locomotive that took us from, can you show me the map, Stacy?
Just one second, I'll bring it back up.
Yeah. So we escaped from Budapest through, we went through Yugoslavia. Now it doesn't exist, Yugoslavia, now it's all part of countries. We went from Budapest all the way down Yugoslavia and right across Yugoslavia, no, that's the map there. Okay, let me show you. Okay. All right. So we went from Hungary. We went down to Yugoslavia, and then we went all the way to Greece, where we were going to go in and find a boat that was going to take us to Palestine. And when we got there, it turned out there was a peasant uprising in Greece. So the conductor felt that it was unsafe for us to go through Greece to get to the boat. So we doubled back and we went straight across Yugoslavia, which was another 800 miles this way. And then we went to a place called Torino, Italy, Turin, Italy, where there was a Zionist camp. And we were going to wait there and make it to it. Then we would make it to Genoa, where there would be another boat that would take us to Palestine, which is now Israel. It was Palestine then. And we went to Turin, and we were there for 6 months. And we were told that one day the trucks were going to come and take us to Genoa, and then take us to Palestine. And sure enough, the trucks came, and we grabbed our belongings, whatever belongings we had, and we climbed up one of the trucks, and we were sitting there waiting to be taken to Genoa. And at one point, the driver came to the back and asked that my parents and I get off the boat, off the truck. Why? He explained that when we get to Palestine, because of it was illegal to sneak into Palestine, the boat would stop maybe at 200 yards from shore, and then some of the sailors would take a rope from the boat and make it right to the edge of Palestine and tie it into one of the trees, and then come back, and then all the passengers would go from there to the shore, holding on overhead, holding on to that rope. And I was too short, he explained. I was too short to reach for the rope. And my dad at first offered that he would carry me, and they said they cannot do that. So we went back to the room, and then my parents decided we were not going to go to Palestine. We were going to go to America. And next morning we just went to a place called Ventimiglia, where we arranged to get on a rowboat that would take us to France, and from France we were going to start moving on, and that's what we did. And we did get a rowboat, and it was dangerous, by the way, in those days to go from Yugoslavia to France, because France was in the war, and so was Italy in the war, so they were against each other. And we did manage to get to France, and from France we did manage with the Jewish organization to get us to Belgium, where my dad had a brother living, and we lived there for 3 years waiting for the legality of moving to America. And we did that. After 3 years, in 1949, we did get on a boat in France, and from there we sailed to the United States. And here I am. So that's about it. That was one of the questions you have.
I was wondering, if something like the Holocaust were to ever happen again, what advice would you give to our future generations?
Okay, I'm going to tell you something about what the Holocaust taught me. The Holocaust taught me an additional language. It's the language of tolerance. It's, in other words, I learned that I need to tolerate anybody and everybody, whatever their religion, whatever their color, whatever their origin. I passed on this information to my children, and my children learned it readily, and they are very tolerant human beings now. So that's what I learned from the Holocaust.
She also asked if you had any advice for their generation, for future generations, to prevent something like this from happening again.
I think tolerance is one of them. Is definitely stop with the hatred that's going on, and be tolerant about anybody and everybody, no matter what their religion is, no matter what their color is, no matter what their origin is. So it still goes on the same thing.
Hi, my name is Matt, and I'd like to ask, what life lessons did you learn by living through the Holocaust, and how did those lessons make you a better and stronger person?
Well, during the Holocaust, I had daily fears. I'll mention the daily fears I had, and this was going on right through the end of the war. One was, will I eat that day? For instance, just about eating that day, because we had such a shortage of food, what I would do is soak my shoelaces in water and suck on it as if that was some food. Or what I would do in the winter, I would grab some snow on the outside, and if I had find some sugar, I would spray it with sugar and I would lick on it. I mean, this was going on a daily basis about will I survive. The other thing I was worried about, will my parents survive? And I'll tell you why. Well, I was going to school in Budapest. One day, as we were going home, the girl who was in my class found out her parents were taken away while she was in school. And they were taken away, and ostensibly they didn't survive. And so I was worried with my parents that they would be taken away somehow for whatever reason. And I pleaded with them, I don't want to go to school. My mother insisted on it and said that they'll stay. So that was a worry I had. I had a worry that my parents would not survive, and that I would not survive. And the other thing is, would I ever grow up? I worried about that. Will I ever grow up, become an adult? And I had that fear also. And so it was an obsession to survive during the whole war. And it was going on a daily basis. And so I became very fearful. And in fact, after the war, when I came to this country, you know what scared me? Police sirens. Because the police sirens immediately transported me to the memories of the bombings and hearing the sirens that alerted us to go down to the cellar to hide. So this is what's going on. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello, my name is Samantha, and I just wanted to ask you, is there a memory that you like vividly remember that you can't let go of to this day, and it like maybe makes your day-to-day life maybe like bad or good?
A memory of good?
Bad or good, like something you carry with you that you can't let go of anymore.
I have too many bad memories from the war. One of them, by the way, I didn't mention before, 53 members of my family were killed during the war. The youngest one was a 12-year-old girl who had polio, and the day she was moved to Auschwitz, she was killed. And also my grandfather, who was only in his 70s, a beloved, he was also killed. So I had 53 members, and that's what I lived with. And today, by the way, one of my cousins who survived the war and was in concentration camp, she just turned 96, and she's still alive, thank God, and God bless her.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
My name is Morgan, and I wanted to ask, was it hard to readjust to your daily life after the war?
What did
I wanted to ask if it was hard to readjust to your daily life after the war.
Well, I adjusted when I came to this country. Shortly after I arrived in August, I went to school. I went to school and I made a lot of friends. With them. And I made every effort to be with them. I remember one of the things that I used to do with these newfound friends is go bowling. We used to go bowling together. And I used to do a lot of things with them. And I did this to rid myself of those memories. But I'll tell you one thing I did do. I did make a date with a girl who I was going to school with. I found her very attractive, and I'll recite to you the poem I wrote about her. I never gave it to her. Ma chère, those of you who speak French, ma chère petite bleue, my lovely blue, because I called her blue because she wore always blue. Ma chère petite bleue, la reine des cieux, the queen of the sky. Je te presse dans mes bras, I hug you in my arms pour exprimer l'amour que je porte pour toi, to express the love I have for you. I never did go out with her on a date, but I had these fantasies, and I tried to make adjustments like that, but I was 15 years old.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to thank everybody. You guys were a great audience. Thank you very much. Let's give another hand for Otto for speaking. Thank you very much for sharing your story. I found out I have one more thing in common with you besides being Jewish, is that my birthday is July 23rd as well.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, happy birthday.
Stacy.